All right. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here talking about creating visualizations for diverse audiences. Thank you so much, Salme, for introducing me. So I have a question that I want to ask you today to get us started. Did you ever think if a chart that you're making or a chart that you are seeing is excluding people? I've thought about it for a long time as a data visualization practitioner, and in my work, in my daily work at FeedZai with my colleagues, we're also studying accessibility in data visualization, and my answer is yes. More frequently than not, the chart that you are presenting to your users, the chart that you are seeing on the web, is excluding some groups of people. And I brought an example here today of a very common chart. This is a chart that was published in Journal Public this year after the March 2024 elections. It's fairly conventional. It's a map that shows the distribution of seats in the parliament. Each dot is a member of the parliament, and they are colored by the party that they belong to. Maybe you don't see a problem, but I'm going to point two issues with this visualization. The first of all is the color choice. And my colleague before just talked about the color in data visualization. I swear we didn't agree on this, but I think it's a very good bridge to what I'm going to say. And this color palette is not accessible for people with color blindness. Someone with deuteranopia, for example, which is a very common condition for color blindness, will struggle to distinguish between certain parties. Of course, you can say that people with a good understanding of the Portuguese parliamentary system will understand the differences, but this is how a visualization for someone with deuteranopia would look like. Maybe if you have deuteranopia, you didn't see a change or you saw a slight change, but if you have regular vision, you did see that the visualization became much more difficult to distinguish. So for example, just to point it out, it's really difficult to distinguish between PSD and LIVRE, and very hard to distinguish between Bloco de Esquerda and Chega. This is one example why this visualization is, in a way, excluding a subset of people. The other example is a bit more technical, a bit harder to explain, and it has to do with screen reader accessibility. So someone who is blind or has low vision will struggle to understand what this chart is about and navigate it. And that happens because someone who is blind or has low vision needs to resort to something called a screen reader, which is a type of assistive technology that will help them understand what's on the page. And this is just some screenshots of what would show up. If the person selects the element of the chart, they would be listening that there's an image there, but they don't really know what it is, and they wouldn't be able to navigate in the different data points in the chart to understand more details about each of the members of the parliament. So these are just two examples. Of course, the issue is not with this visualization in particular. There's many more examples out there that can be improved and can welcome more diverse audiences, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I want to frame this in two ways. I want to frame this idea of creating visualizations for diverse audiences as representing diversity in the chart, and we're going to talk about it in the further slides, and also regarding being mindful of audience diversity, which ties with the points that I was just making. And I'm going to use these two interchangeably, and you'll see some recommendations and some points regarding both of these aspects of creating accessible visualizations. So by now, you might be thinking, OK, but what exactly is a diverse audience? What exactly do we mean when we say this? Well, what I mean when I'm talking about diverse audiences is what makes us unique as human beings, actually. So I'm talking about demographics, our age, gender, sexual orientation, whatever. I'm talking about different physical and cognitive abilities, different life experiences or academic backgrounds, everything that makes us unique. OK, and you can be in agreement with me, or maybe still not sure of if you agree, but how do we design with diversity in mind? And my answer is with empathy. As long as you understand that different people are going to come across your visualizations, that they have different needs, that there is no one-size-fits-all, you will be in a good starting point. But how do we do this technically? And that's, I think, why I'm here to tell you about and to give you some insights. I will split these points into three different axes that I think are detrimental to create a good visualization. And the first one starts with the data. And it's obvious, there's plenty of data scientists and data analysts in this room, I believe. So you know the importance of data, data collection, and you perhaps even thought about how that impacts the outcome of the visualization. And I think that the data that is being collected, it's really important. So if you are plotting your chart and it's related to people, investigating, understanding, and being transparent about it when you create your visualization, it's really important. Even if you're not the person in charge of data collection, having some understanding of what you're visualizing, it's super important. And I have an example. This is a work that I've done with a colleague that's actually here in the audience, called Flags of Inequality. And it uses data from Rainbow Map that is produced by ILGA Europe, an international organization, that highlights the lack of rights for queer communities across Europe. And this is a visualization that puts into perspective the ranking that is produced by ILGA Europe, but it doesn't take into account social perceptions regarding LGBTQIA+ people. And that's fine. I think the only point that I want to make here is that it's important to be clear about that in the methodology. It's important to state what data you are working with, what caveats it might be. And this is just an example of us putting the ranking from the Rainbow Map Index into perspective with the Eurobarometer survey and understanding how the ranking shifts accordingly. The second point, it regards how people are categorized in the data. It's important to guarantee that categories are meaningful and that they reflect how people want to be represented. And this is so important that it can have unexpected impacts. I wanted to bring this example from the US Census. When the US Census started to make an effort to count the Latino population in the 1970s, things didn't go right very well from the beginning. They presented the question in ways that people that were supposed to answer the question were not sure what categories to sign, and so the population today, they think that it's undercounted. So if you were trying to make a visualization with that data today, you would need to understand these about the data and make it obvious in the chart that you are making. So I think it's important to state that people's answers can be unpredictable if they don't feel represented. And this is the points that I wanted to make about the data. Let's move on to design, which is what I think is where us as data visualization practitioners or people that are creating charts in some way in our daily lives really can influence how the chart is perceived. And I had a whole topic about color, but some points were already mentioned, so I'm going to keep it brief. But the idea is that it's really important to use a color palette that is colorblind safe and provides good contrast. We just saw the example in the beginning of not doing so and the impacts that it may have, that might come from it. And there's plenty of tools online that helps create these colorblind safe palettes. There's colorblind simulators like Color Oracle or even the Chrome's dev tools. And there's also things that you can do as a practitioner. You can use fewer colors if the visualization can afford it, or even use double encodings, use shapes and patterns that reinforce the difference between the points in the data. If we think about the example that we saw in the beginning from the chart, the Publico's chart, it would be difficult to create this all new palette because we tend to match the parties with specific colors. So maybe having this approach of different shapes and patterns would be a good idea. Then I want to talk about two things that really concern me and make me think about data visualization and the use of color, which has to do with non-stereotypical use of color. So in the past, we were seeing some important media promoting gender stereotypes with the visualizations, using pink for women and blue for men. And we are seeing this shift to different approaches to visualizing gender. And I think that's really interesting, and I think that's a responsibility of the practitioner. And the second one has to do with thoughtful color when visualizing race, being aware of the needs color-wise and being mindful about that. The second point regarding design has to do with iconography, and I think this is really interesting. When the US reached 1 million deaths from COVID-19, the New York Times did this, I believe, brilliant piece to showcase the dimension of these numbers. So really trying to convey the importance of this number and how many is actually 1 million. And the visualization was well received by the visualization community. This blog from this data visualization blog that is fairly widely read stated that it provides a visual foundation to better understand abstract trends, and that's true. But there was also some people in the community questioning the usage of this type of iconography to convey such important data and data with this emotional weight. And I think it's important to be considerate of that when using unit charts to represent people, and I'm going to, in a few slides, talk about a way to in a way, fix that. The second point that I want to make is about representing people as pictograms. This is a very comical example of why not to do it. This is, in practice, a bar chart that is using shape of women to visualize the data. The axis doesn't even start at 0. We have a bunch of encodings inside the shapes of women, and we have this very non-traditional view and this very forced view of the difference between the heights of Latvian women and Indian women. And I think this is really interesting because it touches the point of representing diversity in the chart, but also of being aware and mindful of the diversity of the audience. And this statement from these women on Twitter, it's really a comical way to read this approach and why not to use the pictograms. But there's an interesting way to use the pictograms, and it touches the example that I was showing from New York Times, and it's this idea of combining the unit chart with the pictograms to give diversity to the unit chart and to showcase that there's people behind it. And I think this is an example from The Pudding. If you don't know, it's a website that produces a lot of data visualizations that are really interesting. And they make this effort when they are presenting what in practice is a unit chart to convey the diversity of the people behind it. And I think this really brings some humanity to the chart. And then I have the whole topic of accessibility. This is a very wide topic, and I won't be able to cover everything regarding accessibility today. But let's try to think a bit about accessible. Accessibility goes way beyond color and the visual perception of color. And I really like this sentence from the Do No Harm Guide. It's a document regarding centering accessibility in data visualization. And they say the following: by thinking carefully about the needs of all people and communities, especially those who have been historically underrepresented and marginalized, we can create better and more accessible content. And I think this is really interesting because it puts into perspective accessibility and why it's important. But I think it's really interesting to think beyond this idea. If we are creating accessible content, we are creating better content for everyone. And that's really what I think the mindset should be. But what really makes a chart accessible? And I'll go a bit technically here, so that's that. There's two sets of guidelines that can be applied to assess if a chart is accessible or not. WCAG, which are the standard web content accessibility guidelines, and Chartability, which was developed by a set of experts in data visualization. When we are talking about a chart that is perceivable, we are talking about a chart that has appropriate contrast and text size. So we are thinking about something that will really benefit everyone because it's easier to read. When we're talking about the operable chart, it's a chart that is keyboard navigable. So if you're not using your mouse, you can just navigate it with a keyboard. And it's so nice to have that option. We're talking about a chart being understandable. It has titles, a summary, a caption. This is pretty standard, and it should be applied to any type of chart. Then if we go to the specificity of data visualization, a chart that is compromising, data is made available. And a chart that is assistive, it's screen reader accessible. If you remember in the beginning, I talked about screen reader accessibility and the example from Publico, which could be improved accessibility-wise. And why do we care about screen reader accessibility? This is a technology that makes understanding charts possible, well, any type of content in the web, possible for blind or low vision people. Considering these users will ensure that they will also have a meaningful experience with the chart. So it's not something to just not think about. And there's a plethora of options if you are creating web-based charts that can really help to make charts more accessible. At FeedsEye, we've developed an open source tool called AutoVisually that helps with these operations and makes it automatic to add these properties to React-based charts. But if you are a data scientist or someone in this audience who is using Python and is not really concerned about JavaScript and web-based technologies, there's also options that help make charts more accessible. And I want to just mention Altair. It's a data visualization library for Python, and it outputs a screen reader-friendly SVG. If you are just, you don't even need to mention accessibility properties. You just create a basic chart, and it will output an SVG with descriptions for the Y and X axis, and a chart that can be navigated, and the screen reader will read a meaningful message to the user. And this can be useful if you're sharing a report with someone, or if you are creating some kind of web-based report or document. So this is the, I would say, one-to-one regarding accessibility. Let's move on to the story, which is the third axis that I wanted to talk about. And this is about framing and language, which to me are key to how the story is perceived. I was a journalist. And I think this example from the New York Times, it's so paradigmatic on why this could be, on why the framing and guiding the reader is important. This is a very complex story about gender, class, race, and it's hard to understand if you're just coming across it. But they populate it with so many insights and so many ways to read the data throughout the news piece. And this really guides the user. And again, this is a story, complex story, about race, gender, class. And they use this neutral, factual tone that gives this story a credibility that I think is really exemplary. Which brings me to the topic, the last topic that I want to talk about. That is the topic of inclusive language. And just bear with me. Inclusive language, this quote by the Atlassian design system, it's really reflects the way I think about this. It isn't about following a list of good and bad words. It's about taking an approach to your writing that avoids assumptions, stereotypes, and treats people with respect. And this is such a key part of creating visualizations for diverse audiences that I could not mention it. And what to consider? There's different things to consider when writing for inclusively and thinking about visualization and writing with inclusive language. And just keep aware of the pronouns that you're using, of potential stereotypes that you are conveying in your data visualization. Acronyms, slang and jargon. Imagine a junior data scientist that is coming across your visualization, and you are using an acronym that they don't really know about. It would put them off reading the chart. In the end, what I think it's really important, it's understanding people, getting in touch with your users, asking them the right questions, understanding how they are experiencing your visualization, and making sure that you are incorporating their feedback in your process. So now, after all of these, I would like you to consider, can a chart include people? Can it be created and tailored in the way that it's inclusive for as many people as possible? And I'm a very positive person, so my answer is yes. As long as you are concerned with creating a chart with transparent data, as long as you are producing a chart with accessible, inclusive design, and you are thoughtful in the story that you are presenting, I would say that yes, a chart can be inclusive. And that's it. Thank you.